Flashes rip across the Java Sea as Admiral Doorman's flagship, Ruyter, shudders, hit by a Japanese torpedo. Nobody saw where it came from. Around her, Allied ships from 4 nations fire blindly into the darkness, their signals misunderstood, their orders tangled between English, Dutch, and Australian voices. Ammunition is running low, radar is gone, reinforcements aren't coming. His remaining cruisers begin maneuvering to rescue Doorman and his crew. But the Admiral knows that if the Japanese sink them too, the Pacific is lost. And he is now also painfully aware that there is only one last order left to give to prevent it. It was early 1942, and the naval campaign in the South Pacific was proving ruthless to the newly arrived American forces. Despite months of naval charges, submarine raids, and relentless air assaults, nothing had slowed the Japanese advance. The Philippines, Malaya, Thailand, and Singapore had already fallen. And now, with a pack of bloodthirsty destroyers encircling the coast of Bali, the Predator was preparing to pounce again. American destroyers John D. Ford and Pope pushed forward, flanked by the Dutch warship Piet Hein, hoping that somehow, this time their charge against Japan would be different. But any hope for an Allied breakthrough was shattered the moment the formation reached the southern tip of the island. Japanese destroyers Asashio and Oshio greeted the defenders with a spread of torpedoes that tore into Piet Hein's hull. There was little the American vessels could do to save their Dutch companion, as sailors were being pounded by incoming shells from enemy cannons, leaving them no choice but to retreat and watch from a distance as the Dutch vessel behind disappeared beneath the waves. By the next day, the island was already in Japanese hands, but the Allies had an even bigger problem. Japan already had its eyes on its next conquest, a belt of islands in the southern Dutch East Indies, known as the Malay Barrier. If Japan seized it, it would effectively gain near total control of the region's sea lanes and get one step closer to Australia. And now, with Bali secured, their Imperial Navy had just the perfect staging ground to launch their offensive. The Allies had no time to regroup. The Japanese were already steaming ahead once more, this time toward Java, the most densely populated island in the Malay Barrier and home to the colonial government. Few commanders would have dared to confront Japan's navy at this stage, yet Dutch Rear Admiral Admiral Doorman did not hesitate. The Dutch East Indies, territory his nation had ruled for more than a century, was at stake, and he was prepared to give up his life before watching it fall into Japanese hands. Doorman would lead a patchwork force drawn from every Allied nation in the region under the ABDA command. 2 heavy cruisers, 3 light cruisers, and 9 destroyers. It sounded like a formidable force, but in reality, it was far from ideal. Some ships carried barely half the firepower of their Japanese opponents. Others bore scars from earlier battles. The American cruiser USS Houston, for example, had its aft turret destroyed and now had to maneuver so that side never faced the enemy. Complicating matters further, only HMS Exeter possessed radar. The rest of the fleet sailed nearly blind, relying on visual signals and a troubled command structure. Doorman's orders were often misunderstood by American, British, and Australian crews, who, for once, were unfamiliar with Dutch naval procedures and, more troubling, were unable to speak a word of Dutch. But there was no time to assemble a better team because almost as soon as the Allies began their patrol along Java's northern shore, sailors could see a lone enemy floatplane on the horizon, announcing the impending arrival of the Japanese attackers. The opposing forces spotted each other on February 27th at around 4 p.m. To Doorman's dismay, he and his men would not be facing a single Japanese group. The first formation, led by Rear Admiral Takeo Takagi, advanced with 2 cruisers and 4 destroyers. Behind them, a second group under Rear Admiral Shoji Nishimura brought a powerful escort of 2 light cruisers and 6 destroyers. Among Nishimura's ships were 4 Shiratsuyu-class destroyers, considered some of the most dangerous in the world at the time. They carried torpedoes capable of traveling nearly 25 miles without leaving a trail, weapons that could sink a cruiser with a single hit. If Doorman didn't strike first, these destroyers would almost certainly put an end to the battle before it even began. As soon as the Allies were close enough, every gun opened fire on the Japanese formation. Lieutenant Commander William P. Mack, who fought in the battle, later recalled, "With only 6 guns, the Houston was still able to throw more steel in faster time than any of her opponents." Her silhouette was large and higher than those of the Dutch and British ships, and she seemed to be a tower of strength in our battle line. But as shells screamed across 24,000 yards of open water, no shell managed to hit, leaving the Allied column to drift dangerously close enough to the Japanese for Takagi's force to land the first clean shots. Doorman's flagship, the light cruiser de Ruyter, was hit first, but the Admiral brushed it aside as if nothing had happened, ordering the line to keep firing. The Japanese barrage, however, was relentless. Before the Allies could score a decisive strike against either Takagi or Nishimura, smoke began to pour from the bow of HMS Exeter. A heavy shell had destroyed most of her boilers, forcing her to turn back toward the port of Surabaya. With the only radar-equipped ship now retreating, Doorman's situation grew even more desperate. Torpedo wakes began cutting through the sea around his formation. From the decks of USS Houston, sailors watched long-lance torpedoes slice right through the battle line, missing their hulls by pure luck. But in the Pacific War, luck alone was never enough, and before the Allied ships could pull clear of the torpedo tracks, the Dutch destroyer Kortenaer took a hit. Lieutenant Commander Mack later described the moment. "She broke in 2 and sank in less than 30 seconds. The swiftness of her going was incredible. When hit, she was about 300 yards abreast of our bow. When we had left her no more than 200 yards astern, she was under." Only 2 hours had passed since the Battle of the Java Sea began, and the outlook was already grim for the Allies. Now, Doorman could only hope that nightfall would grant enough cover to break away, regroup, and prepare for the rematch. As the Allies sailed away from the battlefield, they finally had a moment to breathe. However, they soon realized the night would offer no safety. While Doorman's force moved along the coast of Java, the silence of the patrol was shattered as the destroyer Jupiter was suddenly torn apart. Lookouts scrambled to their stations, scanning the darkness for enemy ships, but there were none. No torpedo wake, no muzzle flashes, no silhouettes on the horizon. This wasn't a Japanese attack at all. The explosion had been triggered by a mine, and, much to the frustration of the Dutch, it was almost certainly one of their own who had laid it earlier to protect Java from invasion. Jupiter's crew fought to save their ship, but the damage was far beyond control. Doorman had no choice but to dispatch one of his remaining destroyers to recover the survivors and return them to port. By now, the Dutch admiral's force had been reduced to 4 cruisers and 4 destroyers. But whether by a strategic miscalculation or an order lost in translation, the destroyers soon fell behind as the cruisers surged ahead at top speed, leaving the Allied formation wide open for an ambush. For Japanese Admiral Takeo Takagi, who had been tracking every Allied movement through a concealed floatplane that none of Doorman's sailors had spotted, this was the moment he had been waiting for. Takagi saw the chance to deliver a decisive strike and claim total control of the Java Sea. As his vessels raced to intercept the Allied line, everything now depended on the last 4 cruisers still in formation: De Ruyter, Java, Perth, and Houston. At the head of the Japanese assault were the heavy cruisers Nachi and Haguro. Around 11 p.m., they sighted the Allied ships almost head-on. There was no time for either side to take proper aim. Sailors fired blindly into the darkness, unleashing round after round, hoping a shell would find the enemy before the enemy found them. For several minutes, the battle unfolded like this until a sudden explosion lit the sea. A Japanese torpedo smashed directly into Java, causing an explosion that tore through her entire hull and left her dead in the water. Before the Allies could return the fire, another Japanese torpedo found its mark, this time striking De Ruyter, Admiral Doorman's flagship and the last Dutch cruiser in the line. The cruisers behind were forced to swing hard to starboard to avoid colliding with the crippled De Ruyter, now drifting helplessly. Their guns kept thundering at the enemy vessels behind, but the objective had shifted. Neutralizing the Japanese convoy was no longer possible. Now, all that was left was to fight for survival. Evacuation was ordered on board the sinking Dutch vessels, but as both ships began to sink, Admiral Doorman held onto the radio to issue one final command to Houston and Perth: leave the survivors behind and run. And that is exactly what they did. That night, more than 340 sailors lost their lives in the Java Sea. And still, the massacre was not over. At dawn, the last survivors of Doorman's force, Perth and Houston, low on fuel and unable to reload a single shell, sailed straight into the main Japanese invasion fleet, preparing to smash through Java. The battle was brutal. Perth was torn apart by destroyers Harukaze, Shirakumo, and Murakumo, their torpedoes ripping into her hull and sending her under in barely 20 minutes. Houston, fighting alone, endured more than 30 shell hits and 2 torpedoes that ended any hope of resistance before she was gone. With their destruction, the last Allied hope in the region was gone, and within 48 hours of Doorman's defeat, Japanese troops were already pouring onto Java. By early March, the island formally surrendered, giving Japan full control over the Dutch East Indies and delivering the Allies one of their worst defeats in the Pacific. However, the war was far from over, and no matter how long it took, the Allies were determined to return, reclaim the islands, and liberate the region from Japan once and for all.